Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating paradox in American literature. We're talking about how some of the most, American stories were actually written thousands of miles away from American shores. We're going to look at two whole generations of iconic writers who, it turns out, had to leave home to really find their voice. So let me ask you this. What do literary heavyweights like Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Jack Kerouac all have in common? I mean, yeah, they all helped define American culture in the 20th century, for sure, but there's this other kind of surprising connection that really shaped their most famous work. And here's the twist. They wrote their most iconic American novels while living outside of America. Get this, The Great Gatsby, the ultimate critique of the American dream, Fitzgerald wrote that in France. The Sun Also Rises, that quintessential story of American disillusionment, Hemingway wrote that in Spain. Even On the Road, the great American road trip novel, was drafted down in Mexico City. All of these defining American stories were born from an outsider's point of view.
So you gotta ask, right? Why? What was going on in the United States that pushed some of its most brilliant creative minds to pack their bags and get out?
For these writers, leaving home wasn't just about a change of scenery. It wasn't a vacation. It was about escaping a version of America that they felt deep down was broken, especially in the wake of war. Okay, first, let's get a key term straight: expatriate. Now, the legal definition can mean, renouncing your citizenship, the whole shebang. But the cultural meaning, which was pretty much shaped by these writers, is way simpler. It's just anyone who voluntarily lives overseas. They weren't ripping up their passports. They were looking for the soul of a country they felt had just lost its way. And you can actually see this pattern pop up twice in the 20th century, and both times it was kicked off by the trauma of a world war. First, after World War I, you get the lost generation. These are artists who just feel totally adrift, emotionally and spiritually, and they flee to Europe in the 1920s. Then, fast forward, after World War II, you get the Beat generation. They're reacting against the super rigid conformity and paranoia of 1950s America, and they look for an escape not just in Europe, but all over the world. At the end of the day, both generations were basically running from different symptoms of the same disease, a post-war America that they found totally and completely stifling. For the lost generation, it was the hypocrisy of things like prohibition and this lingering old-school Puritanism. For the Beats, it was the cookie-cutter suburbs and an obsession with money and stuff. All right, so let's dig into our first case study. Picture this. It's the 1920s. We're heading to Paris with the lost generation. And I mean, this was a who's who of literary legends all in one place. You've got Ernest Hemingway working on that famously blunt, powerful style of his. You have F. Scott Fitzgerald writing about the jazz age from thousands of miles away. And then you have the brilliant Gertrude Stein, who kind of held court in her famous salon, acting as a mentor to all of them. Paris was their creative home base. But why Paris? What was the big deal? Well, as scholar Dr. Leslie Petty puts it, Paris was the hotbed of avant-garde art and music and literature, this kind of ground zero for creativity. If you wanted to push the boundaries and feel truly free, Paris was the place to be. No question. A really big piece of the appeal was what you could call the ancientness of European culture. I mean, they were surrounded by centuries and centuries of history, and that was such a stark contrast to what they saw as the kind of shallow newness of America. So that distance wasn't just about geography, it was cultural. And it gave them the critical perspective they really needed to finally see their own country with fresh eyes. Okay, now, let's hit the fast-forward button for a few decades. The whole cycle of disillusionment and escape, it happens all over again, but with a new generation and a totally new counterculture, the Beats. The absolute core of this movement was this trio of friends: Jack Kerouac, the wild, energetic writer of The Road, Allen Ginsberg, the fiery poet behind Howl, and William S. Burroughs, the experimental, boundary-pushing provocateur. These three together really carved out a whole new path for literature. Their rebellion was aimed right at the heart of what they saw as the crushing conformity of 1950s America. They completely rejected the pressure to get a good job, make a lot of money, and have the perfect little family. Instead, they took off on a spiritual quest, a global wanderlust, just looking for raw, real, authentic experiences. And here's a key difference from the lost generation, who were kind of laser-focused on Paris. The Beats, they went global. Mexico City, Tangiers in Morocco, India, these places became their wells of inspiration, offering them spiritual and cultural experiences they just could not find back home. So when you put them side by side like this, you can really see the evolution. The lost generation was dealing with the external trauma of war, and they looked for shelter in this established cultural hub, Paris. The Beats, though, they were reacting to an internal crisis, this spiritual emptiness they felt in American society, and they looked for answers all over the planet. And you can see that difference in their writing styles, too. The sharp, controlled modernism of the Lost writers versus the spontaneous, free-flowing, almost jazz-like postmodern prose of the Beats.
So they left, they wrote, they saw the world. Cool. But the story doesn't end there. The really important question is, how did their journey change the country they left behind? This is where they start bringing the world back home with them. The way this all works has a name. It's called cultural diffusion. It's just a fancy way of saying it's how ideas and styles spread from one place to another. And for these writers, their books were the vessels. They were the cargo ships carrying European artistic ideas and Eastern philosophies right back to an American audience. You can think of these writers as cultural importers. Their books were literally like messages in a bottle, tossed into the ocean and washing up on the shores of an America that was really struggling with its own identity crisis. They were delivering perspectives that the country desperately needed to hear, whether it knew it or not. And wow, did that message make some waves. The impact was enormous. So let's trace the echo of their rebellion through the years. It was like this 1-2 punch that completely reshaped American culture. First, the Lost generation comes along and helps make modernism mainstream, this artistic movement that just broke all the traditional rules to explore what's going on inside our own heads. Then, the Beat generation pioneers postmodernism, questioning absolutely everything, mashing up high and low culture, and directly planting the seeds for the massive counterculture explosion of the 1960s. And their influence is still echoing today, everywhere you look. You can draw a straight line from the Beats' rebellious soul to the music of Bob Dylan and the Beatles, from their constant questioning of authority to the energy that fueled the feminist and civil rights movements. You can even hear it in the stream of consciousness style of some modern rap music. Their big themes, alienation, the search for meaning, are still very much with us today. So I want to leave you with this final thought. These writers had to physically leave America to find themselves. And in doing that, they helped America find a whole new version of itself. Which leads to a pretty fascinating question for us right now. In our hyper-connected, globalized world, where physical distance means less than it ever has, what does it even mean to be lost? And where do you go to find yourself now?